An experienced Boeing 777 captain faces every pilot's worst nightmare during a nighttime approach, losing his vision completely mid-flight, with hundreds of lives under his responsibility. With only 12 minutes until landing and instruments his eyes can no longer see, he must trust his muscle memory, the co-pilot's voice and decades of training to land 376 passengers safely. A story about courage, trust, and the limits of human capability. Have you ever imagined losing your sight at 3,000 feet, with 376 people depending on you to get them safely to the ground? I didn't have to imagine it. I lived it. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you how I turned the greatest terror of my career into a landing no one aboard would ever forget. If you think you know your limits, prepare to question everything you believe about what's possible. This is a story about flying in complete darkness. Not out there, but within your own mind. My name is Robert. I'm 52 years old, and 28 of those years have been dedicated to commercial aviation. I've flown Airbus, Boeing, and accumulated over 18,000 flight hours. Every takeoff, every landing, every bout of turbulence, it all became part of a mental archive I didn't even know I was building. That October night started like so many others. Complete briefing, flawless checklist, clear skies, and a smooth route over the Atlantic Ocean. There were 3 of us in the cockpit. Me as captain, Luke in the right seat as first officer, and Maria, our flight engineer, doing a familiarization flight on our Boeing 777-300ER. The aircraft was immaculate. We had taken off from a major South American hub at 10:17 p.m., bound for an important European airport. Estimated flight time 11 hours and 43 minutes. We had 376 souls on board, 364 passengers, and 12 crew members. Families returning home, business executives on trips, a group of exchange students, each with their dreams, their plans, their entire lives ahead of them. And all of them trusted us to cross the Atlantic safely. The first 2/3 of the flight proceeded without incident. We cruised at 41,000 feet, fuel consumption within plan, favorable winds even giving us a few minutes ahead of schedule. We talked about family, retirement plans, changes in aviation. Luke was 34 and had that enthusiasm only younger pilots can maintain after a night shift. Maria at 29 absorbed every detail, taking notes on her iPad about procedures and decision-making. Then we served our crew meal. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep our energy up. I'd opted for the chicken, Luke for the fish, a trivial detail that at that moment meant absolutely nothing. It was 4:32 in the morning when we began our initial descent. The sun wouldn't rise for another 2 hours. Below the ocean was an infinite black stain, and ahead the lights of the European coast began to dot the horizon like fallen stars. The first strange sensation came when we were 140 nautical miles from our destination. A slight dizziness, almost imperceptible. I shook my head, thinking it was just accumulated fatigue. But then my vision began to blur at the edges, as if someone was smearing Vaseline on my glasses. I blinked several times. The sensation didn't pass. On the contrary, it got worse. "Luke," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you seeing the instruments clearly?" He looked at me, noticing something different in my tone. "Yes, Captain. Everything's sharp." "Why?" I didn't answer immediately. I was testing my own perception, moving my eyes from one instrument to another. The altimeter, the airspeed indicator, the artificial horizon. Everything was starting to transform into luminous blurs. My heart raced, but years of training had taught me not to panic. Panic kills. Calm saves. "I'm having a visual problem," I said, each word measured and controlled. "Nothing critical yet, but I want you to take the controls while I assess the situation." I saw Luke's expression change. It wasn't fear, but that sharp attention good first officers develop. "Taking controls," he responded, placing his hands on the yoke. "Controls taken." The protocol worked like an anchor amid the chaos beginning to settle in my mind. Maria leaned forward, her voice low and concerned. "Captain, what exactly are you feeling?" I tried to explain while my vision continued to deteriorate. It was as if someone was slowly dimming a light. The edges were already completely dark. I could only see an increasingly smaller area in the center of my visual field, and even that area was blurry, unfocused. "It's progressive," I murmured, more to myself than to them. And it's getting worse fast. I immediately thought of all the medical possibilities: stroke, retinal detachment, migraine with aura, food poisoning affecting the optic nerve. None of them were good news at 28,000 feet. Control, this is... Luke paused, looking at me. I knew what he was thinking. Declaring a medical emergency would bring protocols, ambulances, investigations. But it would also give us absolute priority to land. I nodded, giving him silent authorization. He keyed the radio. Control, reporting medical situation in the flight deck, requesting priority for approach and landing. We maintain operational capability with first officer on controls. The controller's response was professional and immediate. Received. Priority granted. Medical team will be alerted. Advise if you need additional assistance. 23 minutes until planned landing. My peripheral vision had already disappeared completely. I was looking at the world through an increasingly narrow tube, and that tube was closing rapidly. That's when reality hit me with full force. In a few minutes, I would be completely blind. The word ricocheted in my mind. Blind, blind, blind. 28 years of experience, 18,000 flight hours, all those perfect landings, all those emergencies successfully managed, and now this. I felt a chill run down my spine, not for my own safety, but for the 376 people behind us, for the children sleeping in their parents' arms, for the elderly returning to see their grandchildren, for the young people at the beginning of their lives. Robert, Luke's voice brought me back. Talk to me, how is it now? I forced myself to assess objectively. Peripheral vision 0. Central visual field reduced to approximately 10 degrees and decreasing. Severe blurring. I can distinguish lights and shapes, but no details. Maria was on the phone with the company's flight physician, describing my symptoms. I could hear fragments of the conversation. Rapid progression, no prior trauma, conscious and oriented. Luke kept the aircraft stable, following vectors from control. His voice was firm, but I knew that tone. He was worried. Captain, I can make this landing. You know I can. He was right. Luke was an excellent pilot with over 5,000 flight hours. Technically, he was fully qualified to land that 777, but something inside me resisted. It wasn't ego, it was something deeper. It was the responsibility of 28 years of command. It was the knowledge that however competent Luke was, I had experience that simply can't be taught. It needs to be lived. I know you can, I replied. But I'm still the captain of this aircraft, and as long as I can contribute, I'm going to contribute. Even as I said this, the darkness continued advancing. The tunnel vision was now reduced to maybe 5 degrees. It was like looking through a straw, and that straw was closing. Luke, I want you to describe every instrument, every reading, every change to me. You're going to be my eyes. I'm going to be your experience. We're going to do this together. I could feel his hesitation. It was an insane idea. A blind pilot trying to assist in a landing. But then he understood. It wasn't about my ego or my stubbornness. It was about using every available resource, every piece of knowledge, every advantage we could gather to bring those 376 people home safely. Understood, Captain, he said, and there was a new determination in his voice. Let's bring everyone home. Maria hung up the phone. The doctor said it could be a severe adverse reaction to food, temporarily affecting the optic nerve, or it could be... She hesitated. Or it could be something more serious. Either way, you need immediate medical attention as soon as we land. 12 minutes to landing. My central vision was now just a point of blurry light. Everything around was absolute darkness. But my mind was clear, crystal clear even, and it was at that moment I realized something fundamental. I didn't need to see the instruments. I knew them by heart, every position, every function, every normal reading. What I needed was someone to confirm what my fingers and muscle memory already knew. Luke, I said, my voice surprisingly calm, in 28 years I've made over 12,000 landings. My body knows what to do. My mind knows what to do. I just need you to be my visual confirmation. Do you trust me? There was a pause. Then, with my life, Captain. I placed my hands on the controls, and even though I could see practically nothing, I felt the aircraft respond to my touch like an old friend. The coolness of the yoke, the slight vibration of the engines transmitted through the structure, the subtle sound of control surfaces adjusting, All of this told me more than my eyes could. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe to the Kaisha Preta channel so you don't miss the next tale from the skies. Passing 15,000 feet, Luke reported, his voice firm and clear. Speed 280 knots, flap configuration 1, landing gear up. Trimmed for descent. I visualized each word in my mind, building a complete mental picture of our situation. Reduced to 250 knots, I ordered. Request vector for ILS intercept. I felt the slight pull as Luke reduced power. Control has cleared us for vector 095. Descend to 8,000 feet. ILS active. Localizer captured. My vision was now practically nil. Everything was darkness, except for occasional flashes of light I couldn't identify. But something strange was happening. Without the distraction of vision, my other senses were sharpening. I could feel every subtle change in the aircraft's attitude through the seat. I could hear variations in the engine tone that would normally go unnoticed. I could even smell the different air conditioning scent when we changed altitude. Flaps 5, I commanded. I heard the hydraulic motor and felt the slight additional drag. Speed now 210 knots, Luke confirmed. 8,000 feet, stabilized, localizer centered, glide slope alive. Each word painted a picture in my mind. I wasn't seeing the aircraft. I was feeling the aircraft, understanding it on a level that transcended vision. Gear down. The familiar mechanical sound of the gear extending, followed by 3 tones indicating extension and lock. 3 green, Luke confirmed. Gear down and locked. Maria was silent behind us, but I could feel her presence, her total attention on every move we made. Flaps 15, I ordered. More drag, more deceleration. The familiar dance of landing preparation, executed thousands of times, now performed purely by touch and memory. Passing the outer marker, Luke informed, 10 miles from the threshold, 4,000 feet, glide slope centered, localizer centered, wind 340 at 12 knots, runway 09R clear and dry. I processed each piece of information instantly. Light crosswind from the left. We'd need a small correction. Flaps 25, I commanded. Final speed 150 knots. 5 miles, Luke continued. Crossing 2,000 feet. Stabilized on approach. His hands were on the controls alongside mine, ready to take over at any moment if I made a mistake. But something extraordinary was happening. Without being able to see, I was flying with a precision that surprised even myself. It was as if all those years of experience had been downloaded directly into my nervous system, transforming me into an extension of the aircraft itself. 1,000 feet. Luke's voice was slightly tense now. This was the critical moment. Stabilized, glide slope centered, speed good. My hands made micro-adjustments to the controls, responding to sensations so subtle I couldn't explain them myself. A slight yoke movement to the left, correcting for wind drift. A gentle power reduction adjusting the descent. 500 feet, rate of descent 700 feet per minute. That's when it happened. A gust of wind hit the aircraft, throwing us to the right. I felt it through the seat, through the controls. My reaction was instantaneous, left aileron, slight rudder pressure, compensating. Gust corrected, Luke murmured, admiration in his voice. How did you... I felt it, I replied simply. 400 feet. Glide slope perfect, speed 148 knots. My world had been reduced to pure sensations. The weight of the aircraft through the controls, the vibration of the engines, the sound of air passing over the fuselage. And through these senses I was seeing more clearly than I ever had with my eyes. 200 feet. Rate of descent optimal. Alignment perfect. Luke's voice had a note of reverence now. 100 feet. I began the flare, gently pulling back on the yoke. I felt the aircraft respond, the nose rising gradually, the rate of descent decreasing. 50 feet. 40. 30. Maria was holding her breath. I could feel it. 20 feet. 10. I reduced power to idle, continuing the flare, waiting for the touchdown, waiting for... The gentle touch of the main wheels. Perfect. Smooth, like a feather landing. Followed a second later by the nose gear touching down. Reverses, I commanded, and felt the engines roaring in reverse, the deceleration pressing me against my seatbelt. Auto spoilers deployed, Luke confirmed, his voice now full of barely contained emotion. Speed 80 knots, 60, 40. We exited the runway and entered the taxiway. Only then, when the aircraft stopped completely, did I let out the breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally finding an outlet. Maria started crying softly behind us. Luke simply remained silent for a long moment before whispering, "Captain, I've never... That was..." He couldn't finish the sentence. The flight deck erupted in activity. Control was requesting confirmation that we were okay. The medical team was already on the way. And I sat there, completely blind now. Not even that point of light remained, but with the strangest sense of peace I'd ever experienced. We had done it. Against all odds, against all logic, we had landed 376 people safely. But the story was far from over. The passengers began to applaud. We didn't know at the time, but one of the flight attendants, sensing something unusual from the tense communication between the cockpit and control, had discreetly informed some passengers about the situation. The news spread through the cabin in whispers. And when we landed, that smooth, perfect touchdown that many said afterward was the best landing they'd ever experienced, they understood what had happened. A blind pilot had just saved them. The medical team entered the cockpit 3 minutes after we stopped. They guided me out, Luke and Maria at my side. I could hear passengers' voices, some crying, others expressing gratitude. "Thank you, Captain," someone said. "You're a hero," said another. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt humble, grateful, and deeply aware of how close we'd come to disaster. At the hospital, the doctors worked quickly. Tests, more tests, specialists being called. The conclusion came 4 hours later. Severe food poisoning from a rare toxin that had temporarily attacked my optic nerve. The chicken dinner I'd eaten was contaminated. Luke, who had eaten the fish, had escaped. The toxin had caused a rapid and severe neurological reaction, but, and here was the good news, temporary. My vision began to return gradually over the next 18 hours. First just shadows and shapes, then blurs of color, finally complete and sharp vision. The doctors called it acute toxic optic neuropathy with complete recovery. I called it the scariest day of my life. The investigation that followed was comprehensive. The airline reviewed all food preparation procedures. The catering supplier was investigated. New protocols were implemented, ensuring pilots in the same cockpit would never eat meals from the same batch. Luke and I were commended for our coordination and professionalism under extreme pressure. Maria wrote a detailed report that became study material at aviation schools. But what stayed with me wasn't the praise or the media attention that followed. It was something Luke told me 3 days later when we met for coffee. "You know, Robert," he said, stirring sugar into his cup, "I always thought being a good pilot was about knowing the procedures, understanding the systems, executing checklists perfectly. But that night, you taught me something different. You taught me that being a great pilot is about becoming one with the aircraft. It's about trusting your instincts as much as your instruments. It's about having so much experience in your blood that you can fly even when you can't see." He was right, but only partially, because what I learned that night was something even deeper. I learned we can do things we thought impossible, that the human body and human mind are capable of extraordinary adaptations when necessary. That years of training and experience aren't just accumulated knowledge. They become part of who we are, accessible even when our senses fail. I also learned about trust, the trust Luke placed in me, even when he could easily have taken complete command. The trust I place in myself, not out of arrogance, but from decades of deliberate practice. And the trust passengers place in us every time they board an aircraft, a sacred trust that cannot be taken lightly. I returned to flying 6 weeks later, after being cleared by doctors and passing psychological evaluations. My first flight back was emotional. When I placed my hands on the controls and felt that familiar vibration, that connection with the machine, tears came to my eyes. But they were tears of gratitude, not fear, because I now knew with absolute certainty that I had chosen the right profession, that I had trained enough, that I was prepared for the unthinkable. Luke became a captain a year later. He deserved it. And one of the first things he did was implement an innovative training program at the company. Simulator flights performed blindfolded, forcing pilots to trust their other senses and their crews. The idea was considered radical at first, but the results were undeniable. Pilots who went through this training reported a deeper connection with their aircraft and better crew coordination. Maria pursued a career as an instructor, using our experience as a case study in her classes on crisis management and teamwork. She always told students, "That night, I saw the impossible happen." And it happened because 3 people decided to trust each other completely, use every ounce of their abilities, and never, not for a second, give up. As for the 376 passengers, many of them wrote me letters in the following months. One in particular stayed with me. It was from a 12-year-old girl named Sarah who was traveling alone to visit her grandparents. She wrote, "Dear Captain Robert, my dad told me what happened on that flight. He told me you landed the plane without being able to see. I was so scared to fly alone, but now I know that no matter what happens, there are people like you who will never give up on keeping us safe. When I grow up, I want to be a pilot like you." I replied to Sarah's letter, encouraging her to follow her dream. And 6 years later, I received another letter from her informing me she'd been accepted to an aviation academy. She ended the letter with, "I'm going to fly for both of us, Captain, and if I ever lose my vision on a flight, I'll remember you and know it's possible." Today at 52, I continue to fly. Every flight is a reminder of that night. I no longer fly with fear or apprehension about what could go wrong. Instead, I fly with the deep awareness that I'm prepared for anything, that my years of experience weren't in vain, that aviation isn't just about technology and procedures, it's about the human spirit, the capacity for adaptation and the determination to protect the lives entrusted to our care. Sometimes on quiet night flights, I deliberately close my eyes for a few seconds. I feel the aircraft through the controls, hear the engines, perceive every subtle movement, and I smile, because I know that terrible night transformed me into a better pilot, not despite the blindness, but because of it. It taught me to see in ways that don't depend on eyes, to trust parts of myself I didn't know existed, to understand that we're far more capable than we imagine. Subscribe now to the Caixa Preta channel so you don't miss the next tale from the skies. Leave a comment telling me if you've ever been through a situation where you needed to trust abilities you didn't even know you had. Aviation taught me that the limits we believe we have are often just illusions, that the impossible is just something we haven't tried yet, and that, in the end, it's not our eyes that guide us through darkness. It's our courage, our experience, and our unwavering refusal to give up on the people who depend on us. And you know what's most fascinating about all this? 3 months after that flight, during a routine audit, they discovered that one of the aircraft's hydraulic systems had developed a minor fault during the final approach, a fault so subtle the instruments barely detected it. Under normal conditions, it wouldn't have affected the landing. But under the conditions we were in, Luke commented afterward, "If you'd been flying only by instruments, that anomaly could have caused an overcorrection. But you were feeling the aircraft. You instinctively compensated for something even the instruments weren't showing clearly. Sometimes, when we lose one sense, we don't become weaker. We become more complete." If you've made it this far, subscribe to the Caixa Preta channel right now. Share this story with someone who needs to know that impossible is just a word. And come back for the next episode, because the skies hold many stories that need to be told.